Water is everywhere. 水滴、溪泉、江河、洋海、冰雪、云雨、水系。How did the people in ancient China write the character for water? 水. This is 水, as written by people more than 3,000 years ago. But before we try to understand this character, there is something important to keep in mind. People 3,000 years ago looked at the same world we do today, but they did not necessarily understand or describe what they saw in the same way. So we cannot simply look at this ancient ship and give it an explanation based on our own imagination today. What we can do is look at the writing and the evidence they left behind and try to understand it little by little. If we put several oracle-born forms of water side by side, you will notice that they do not all look exactly the same, but they usually share a very recognizable structure. There is a longer line running through the center with shorter marks or lines on both sides. The number, position, and shape of these shorter marks are not always the same. So, what do these lines represent? Scholars of early Chinese writing generally interpret 水 as a pictograph, with the overall form depicting flowing water. The long line in the center is generally understood as the main flow of water. The shorter marks on either side are also interpreted as elements representing the form or movement of water. Some interpretations describe them as drops of water or smaller currents. But there is something important to remember here. What we are looking at today is an interpretation made by scholars based on surviving ancient writing materials. It is not an instruction manual left behind by someone 3,000 years ago. So we can say with reasonable confidence, this character represents water. But exactly what every line means to the people who wrote it 3,000 years ago is something we do not need to pretend we fully understand. But whenever I look at this character, I also have another visual association. If the line in the middle were a river, don't these little marks on either side look a little like rocks or small islands in the water? This is simply a visual association I have today. When looking at this ancient form, it is not an explanation of the character's origin, but this is also one of the things I love about Chinese characters. A ship left behind more than 3,000 years ago can still make us observe it, imagine, and continue asking questions today. If you see it differently, you are also welcome to share your thoughts in the comments. As time passed, the form of Chinese characters continued to change. One important factor influencing these changes was what people used to write with and what they wrote on. Most people probably never think about the writing surface itself. When we need to write something today, we can simply pick up a piece of paper and a pen. But more than 3,000 years ago, there were no paper mills or pencil factories. A large amount of the Shang Dynasty writing that survives today was carved into turtle shells and animal bones. These hard materials, together with the process of carving, could also affect the way the writing form ultimately appeared. But this does not mean that people at the time only wrote by carving with knives. In fact, there is evidence that brushes were already being used from writing during the Shang dynasty. At the same time, ancient people also cast or inscripted writing on bronze verses. Today we call inscription found on ancient Chinese bronzes bronze inscriptions or 经文. 经文 much easier. In early bronze inscriptions, 经文, we can still easily recognize the connection between 水 and its early forms. Later, large amount of writing were also written on bamboo and wooden slips, as well as silk. As writing practice continued to develop, the form of Chinese characters also continued to change, gradually developing forms that were more standardized and convenient to write. By the Qing dynasty, the small seal script or 小篆 was promoted as a standardized official script. You can see that 水 still preserves some features of its early forms, but it has become more regularized. However, history was not simply a matter of one script suddenly replacing another one. As people continued to write, the early rounded and curving lines gradually changed as well, becoming closer to the kinds of strokes we recognize today. Today, we call this long and important process the clerical transformation or 历变. By the clerical script stage, you may suddenly think this is starting to look familiar. Because from around this stage, Chinese characters increasingly shifted from the line-based structures of ancient script toward the stroke-based structures that are more familiar to us today. After further development, regular script or 楷书 gradually matured. Alright, after seeing so many different forms of water, 水, you may be starting to wonder, wait, so which one am I actually supposed to write? Don't worry, what we have just seen is the history that 水 traveled through. I'm not asking you to choose between 5 different ways of writing it. Today, this is the one you need to learn. 水. This is a form of 水 that you need to recognize and write in modern Chinese. And it is much simpler than those ancient forms. It has only 4 strokes. The central stroke moves downward and then turns slightly upward at the end. Today, we call this stroke 竖钩, the vertical hook. The strokes on either side are also no longer the variable shorter marks found in early form of 水. They have become part of a stable stroke structure. But if you look closely, it seems to preserve a little of its appearance from more than 3,000 years ago. Ancient Chinese characters that once appeared on oracle bones and bronze verses traveled through a long history of change and eventually become the character we write today, 水. Do you remember all the forms of water we saw at the beginning of the video? 水滴, 溪泉, 江河, 洋海, 水汽. Have you noticed something? It seems that none of this contains the 水 we just learned. Wait! 滴, 溪, 江, 河, 洋, 海, 气. Why do they all have these 3 dots on the left? Could these 3 dots also be 水? That's right. When 水 becomes a component of another Chinese character, especially when it appears on the left. It is often written like this. We commonly call it 三点水, 3-dot water. These 3 dots can often give us a clue. In many Chinese characters, this component carries a semantic connection with water, liquids, or related meanings. For example, 江, 河, 湖, 海, 洋, and 滴, 汁, 泥, 沙, 泪, 汗, 气. Don't worry, you don't need to learn all these characters today. If today you can recognize, pronounce, and write 水, that is already a success. We will get to know these characters one by one in future episodes. Let's look at this character one last time. 水, water. A Chinese character that has been written for more than 3,000 years, recording one of the most ordinary and most important things in our world: water. Alright, that's all for today. I hope next time we can continue exploring the beauty of Chinese characters together. Bless you and your family. Which one is water?